Dr. Myers, 12-minute response.
Okay, first a couple of things here. Mr. Durston brought up logical fallacies here. And let me just point out that in the opening to my talk, I used some humor and I made fun of the Bible. Mr. Durston accused atheists of being evil, immoral monsters. Now, is that a logical fallacy? Is there a name for this? Is it called poisoning the well? I mean, I was utterly appalled at you coming up here and making these kind of baseless accusations to large numbers of people based on bogus evidence. First of all, what is a core atheist society? Can you name one? What were these 5 that you mentioned? These top 5?
Soviet Union, Communist China, North Korea, Cambodia.
This is not a dialogue back and forth. It's a response to what he already said. Sorry about that.
You left
That's
out some rather important
prerogative.
things. What was the 5th one?
So if you would continue with those, with your field of reference.
I have just been accused of being an immoral monster. I mean, I think I can address this.
It depends whether you're a passive atheist or not.
I'm not a passive atheist. Okay, well, first of all, your examples are nonsense. This is a biased view that is invented by some idiot. Those are not societies that are core atheist societies. Those are people that are wrapped around an ideology like Marxism, Maoism, Leninism, the cult of personality in North Korea. You can't say that these are purely atheist societies or societies built around atheism. Atheism is one of the things they use to eradicate opposition. It's not a core principle of those societies. I would also mention that often what people drag out here is the idea that Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, and I've heard them called atheists so often. Germany is a Catholic and Lutheran country. Adolf Hitler was Catholic. The Pope at that time closed his eyes to the atrocities going on in Germany. You cannot say that atheism somehow is the cause of these kinds of atrocities. I'd also point out that Mr. Durston also accused me of having no meaning to my life, of being like toxic waste. Well, thank you. No, I happen to think that my life has a lot of meaning. My life has meaning in itself, not in some belief in some imaginary superstitious being. That what we have to do is derive meaning from our life from what we have right now, the people we live with, the families we have, the people we work with. This is where meaning comes from. It's not from this imaginary deity that he thinks is so important. The other thing I noticed in his talk is he must know what I am. I'm a biologist, right? Look at what he was pushing. He was pushing these ideas of a primal cause. That he was going back to the Big Bang. He was talking about physics. He was ignoring anything to say about biology. I think that was by intent. He kind of knew what my expertise would be in, so he explicitly avoided that. I think that's kind of cheesy. Okay. Also, I think those arguments are irrelevant to the point of the debate. They do not say anything about a personal God. I mean, you might be able to convince me that there was some supernatural entity that created the universe. Sure. Show me the evidence. I mean, I'm not going to accept it right now, but that's why I said there's probably no God, is because, okay, maybe there could be something like that. But if you're talking about a personal God, you've got to be talking about something happening now. Something that's happening in real time in the real world. He's got to be intervening somewhere, and I saw no evidence for that. In fact, all the evidence we got was a bunch of Bible bullshit. I'm sorry, but you cannot propose the Bible as a premise in these debates. I don't believe in the Bible. Why should I believe one word that's written in the Bible? Show me some independent evidence. Talking about biblical prophecies, that's even more ridiculous. The Bible, all these stories of Jesus, were written like 100 years after Jesus died. There was a lot of mythological retrofitting going on there. Yes, there are these nice little prophecies buried in the Old Testament, And what did people do? Well, they cobbled up the stories to fit the prophecies. You don't think the Bible is a good biographical account of Jesus, do you? It's not. It's a bunch of nonsense built up after the fact. Okay, we're supposed to have some warrant for believing in these prophecies. I have no warrant for believing this. Why should I believe this? There's no historical evidence for the resurrection. None at all. There is no contemporary evidence of this at all. Talking about a surge in people of that time believing it, there's no accounts from the time of the crucifixion. This is invented history. He's making it up. All of these stories were written long after the fact by people who weren't there. So there's no reason to accept these. I noticed later in his talk he mentioned this thing that he objected to the scientific explanations by saying you cannot invoke infinite, invisible, untestable entities. Anybody notice the irony here? He's only invented one, but it's the biggest one you can imagine. It's just this kitchen sink full of garbage that he's thrown together. That's God, is just infinite, untestable entity, which he thinks is a mark against science, but I certainly think it's even more of a mark against religion. Another point. Mr. Durston likes to throw around big numbers. Big numbers sound impressive, don't they? All these probabilities he's tossing around, saying how many bits this has, how many bits that other thing has, telling you, without giving you any evidence, that nature has a limit on how many bits of information it can generate. Well, I would like to ask how many bits of information differentiate Mr. Durston from his parents? Does anybody know? Any guesses? Do you think it's just a few? Do you think it's less than 150? He said this was kind of his limit. I mean, if you just look at mutations, we know the mutation rate is about 10 to the minus fifth, 10 to the minus sixth per nucleotide per division. And we know how many divisions produce the gametes that produce Mr. Durston. And so we know that he has on the order of 300 mutations in his body. So that's 300 nucleotide differences, which I think would be estimated to be about 600 bits of information right there. And that's not even accounting for recombination, which is the major source of new information in his body. So what he's just proposed is a metric that limits the amount of information nature can create, that says that Mr. Durston is an unnatural being produced by unnatural means with no grounding in natural processes. And again, that's ridiculous. You can't just invent these numbers out of whole cloth and throw them out in an audience like this and expect that because he's using big numbers that you're just going to believe it. You're not that credulous. All right. Let's see. One last thing. He says he's wondering about the evolution of the software. Okay, I mentioned a few times that I'm a developmental biologist. If you read the developmental biology literature, what you will discover is that there is a universal contempt for the software analogy. DNA is not a computer program. It is not software. There is no simple encoding of instructions in the genome. When you look at the genome, what you find is many disparate elements that have to be expressed in a context, in the environment of the cell, and that development proceeds epigenetically. That what happens is that new information develops over time. All the information to make a human being is not present in the zygote, in the fertilized egg. The information to make a human being is going to emerge gradually by a process of interaction between dividing cells that will eventually lead to the complexity that we see in human beings here. So you ask me you could ask me where the software comes from, and I would tell you there is no software. You're using a faulty analogy to make your case. So again, another bogus story for Mr. Durston. This is not how development proceeds. It's not how evolution works. And with that, I'll stop.